Okay, hi guys. This live is going to be all about type 2 diabetes. So whenever I say diabetes, I am talking about type 2 and how to treat it naturally. So first of all, we need to understand a little bit about what diabetes is. And obviously it's the difficulty for a diabetic to be able to get sugar into the cells. Okay, usually that's achieved with insulin. And so a diabetic is said to be insulin resistant because the insulin is not getting the sugar where it needs to go. So as a consequence of that, the diabetic ends up with high blood sugars, which leads to high levels of inflammation. And then from that, all different types of damage, neurological damage, especially in the hands and the feet, like damages the heart and so on. And so diabetics have much higher incidences of death through things like heart attacks and strokes, but also they get disabled many years before that, typically, by having damage to their feet in particular. So walking becomes difficult. If they get a wound in any of those areas that are not being well served by their circulation, then the wounds often don't heal very well, or if at all, which ends up in amputations. And so often when you see people without legs, very likely is because they're diabetic, or without feet, etc. It often starts with toes, so they'll get toes amputated and then it will gradually go up. So it's pretty serious. Okay, it's nothing to take lightly. So we need to understand a little bit about diabetes. And first of all, I want to comment on diagnosis, because the way they diagnose diabetes is rubbish. So basically what they do is they take a reading of your blood sugar, and when your blood sugar goes outside of a certain range, in different countries, there's different scales depending on what country you're in. So I'm not going to go into the numbers because it's confusing with the different ones, but you'll know the range for your own country. So anyway, once your blood sugars start going above what they call the normal range, then you're classed first of all as pre-diabetic and then diabetic. This is indeed a really poor way of doing the testing. I'm not saying that it's inaccurate. Yes, when those sugars do go into those ranges, you are diabetic. Why I'm not in favor of it is because there are tests that can tell you that 10 or more years before you get to that point. So let me explain a little bit about that. So what happens is that as your body begins to have a little difficulty getting the sugars into the cell, and I'm going to go into some reasons, of the prime reasons why that is in a bit. But as your body starts to have difficulty getting it into your cell, your sugar goes into your blood and raises your blood sugars. However, when that happens, your body is triggered and says, hey, we've got a problem, we have too much sugar in the blood, so it makes more insulin, and that insulin, that extra insulin now, will be able to drive the sugar into the blood. And so your blood sugars go to normal, so if you were to be tested, you would not be showing as diabetic. Now, after a while, that extra insulin is not enough, okay, and your sugars go up again in your blood, and the same thing happens, and your body triggers some more insulin, and so on and so on. It will keep doing that, and it will keep raising your insulin and pushing your sugars into your cells with the extra insulin. And so on a blood sugar test, you are not going to see any problems. And as I say, this can be the case for 10 or 15 or more years before eventually your body cannot make enough insulin and the sugar goes up beyond that level and it just can't handle it. And now you'll see the higher sugar levels on a test. So when they say you're pre-diabetic, you've been in trouble for a long time before that. So what they should be doing instead is they should be measuring the insulin levels, because when they measure the insulin levels, they will see that your insulin levels are much higher than they should be to push the sugar into the cell. So your sugar's not there yet because your insulin is dealing with it. But if you were tested, you would see that your insulin levels were high, and you were on your way to what they diagnose as diabetes, but you've already got problems. So I highly recommend you can ask to have your insulin tested. And insulin, by the way, drives up weight. So many people who are having weight issues, especially if it's around the middle here, okay, and you don't know why, because you haven't changed your eating, or you're eating even less and you're still putting the weight on, it's often due to higher levels of insulin. So before you ever show as diabetic, you may well have issues putting on weight. And then they say that weight increases risk of diabetes if you've got, no, it's because you've got a problem that you have that weight. Okay, they always get it the wrong way around in conventional medicine. Okay, so that is the problem. And by the way, the primary cause of that is not eating a lot of sugar, as a lot of people say. There's many studies that show it's not related to that. It's actually toxicity. Okay, but there's still a lot of work needs to be done. A lot of studies need to be done to understand exactly what toxins and by what mechanism. But it's a toxic issue. Okay, now one of the key factors behind diabetes. So here's something that I found interesting for many years and couldn't understand. I now do, but I couldn't understand. But I was hearing stories from diabetics who went on a strict diet, let's say a vegan diet or a plant-based diet, and they were able to bring their sugars right down. In some cases, even fruit only, and they were bringing their sugars down, eating a lot of sugar, and they were bringing their sugars down with fruit, which didn't make any sense to me, but that's what they were doing. And then on the other hand of the other side of the scale, I was seeing a lot of people going on a carnivore diet, which is to say just animal products, meat, eggs, cheese, sometimes just meat, and they were getting their blood sugars into the normal range. Now, I'm not saying necessarily cure, because if they then ate bad, then they couldn't handle the sugars. In some cases, people were curing it. In other cases, it wasn't cured, but they were maintaining their sugars in the normal range. But with carbs, which is sugar, and with meat, both things, they were doing it, and that made no sense to me. I couldn't see how that fit until I understood something called the Randall cycle. So the Randall cycle, in its basic sense, I'm going to keep this very simple because it's actually quite complex, but I'm going to keep this very simple. But basically, when you eat carbs with fat, the fat blocks the sugars from entering the cells, and the sugars block the fat from entering the cells. So they block each other. So when you eat what we could call a balanced diet, some fruit and veggies and meat, a bit of everything, this balance actually causes an imbalance because they're both fighting for the same thing to access the cell, and they block each other. So the fat blocks the sugar, so the sugar goes into the blood. The sugar blocks the fat, so the fat goes into storage. And in both cases, it's bad for you to do that. So eating fat with carbs turns out to be not a good idea, especially if you're already on that path of insulin resistance. If you eat just carbs, you don't have that problem. The sugars get into your cell. Okay, if you eat just meat, then you don't have any sugars, so you haven't got to worry about that at all. But if you eat the two together, there's a problem. And what you will notice is that most of the food that we recognize as bad for you, the food that we love to eat but we know we shouldn't, that food is basically a combination of carbs and fat. They've learned that if you put carbs and fat together, it's very addictive, very tasty. So if you're talking donuts or Pringles or ice cream, all of these things are carbs and fat. So carbs and fat are something that you should be avoiding if you have diabetes. You need to pick one or the other. And my preference is that you pick the fat, not the carbs, for various reasons. So a lot of people don't understand that, don't know that, but that is very important knowledge to have, because that is. Let me put chat on in case I see that some people have said something. Let me just. Okay, they've just said hi. Please say that again. Okay, Heidi, except for I didn't see your message, so I'm not sure which bit I'm supposed to say again. I would do if you just message me what the bit is that you're asking me about. I'll say it again. But hi to everyone that said hi. I'm sorry I didn't have the chat on. I didn't notice until just that moment. Okay, so carbs and fat are the big enemy together, not separately, together when you eat them together. There's actually in the UK, there's a no, you don't want to be mixing fat with carbs, any fat. Veggies don't have much in the way of fat typically. I mean, you've got avocado, but mostly they don't have fat. So fat and carbs, separate them. There's a diet company in the UK. I think it's called Slimming World. I remember doing the diet. We all did it about 15 years ago, and it was a weird diet that I didn't understand then because you could eat as much as you wanted pretty much within reason. But what they did was they gave meal plans, and they were either protein-based meals like meat and fat based meals, or they were carb meals, and everyone was losing weight, and I didn't understand it, and now I do. But at that time I didn't, and we all lost a chunk of weight eating as much as we wanted just by we made our choices if we were going to go the protein fat route or the carb route. So very, very weird that I thought at the time. I didn't know about the Randall cycle back then, but now I understand it. And that's the driver of diabetes. Okay, this blocking of sugars into the cells, which causes the need to raise insulin, which ends up with insulin resistance. Now, there's a toxicity aspect to it as well, which I'm not going to go into because it's not enough known about it, but toxicity is playing a part. So that's the problem. Yeah, the Atkins diet was a protein-based diet, protein and fat, low carb. So one of the things. So let's move on. Let's move on to what we can do if we have diabetes. What we can do for free. There's certain supplements you can take and stuff which cost money, and I think is worth doing. But there's certain things that you can do for free. So let's talk about some of the things that you can do for free to help with diabetes. I'm not a fan of medication unless your sugars are so high that you're at great risk from that. Then in a short term, you might want to use medication. But medication is only going to suppress the sugars. It's not going to deal with any of the cause. So you're going to be on them forever and getting worse and worse as you go. So I'm much more happy to deal with it naturally and to control it or reverse it. I've helped many people reverse their type 2 diabetes, but some people who do the same stuff as the ones that reverse it, it doesn't reverse. It just controls. So I'm not sure why some people I can't reverse their diabetes. I can only control it. If they follow what I say, they'll control it, but not fix it. And other people, the majority, can reverse it completely. So, and especially in the early stages when it's what we call pre-diabetic, it's fairly easy to reverse. So, what can we do to control stroke reverse type 2? And these things help with type 1 as well. But type 1, although I've heard of some people reversing type 1, most people with type 1, it is going to be for life. But again, there's things that you can do much of what I'm going to say would apply to type 1 as well. But I personally have a lot less experience helping people with type 1, so I don't really want to talk too much about type 1, other than what I'm saying will help them. Okay, so diet plays a major role in helping worsen diabetes or control or help diabetes. You can get your blood sugars into normal range no matter how bad you are with diet. The problem is it requires discipline, and a lot of diabetics aren't very disciplined with their food, and part of the reason is that they have cravings for sugar. There's supplements that you can take to help with that, but that's part of the problem. But let's talk about specifically what you can do with diet. So the first thing, let's ignore what you eat for a minute and talk about when you eat, because when you eat can have a big impact on helping control your blood sugars. And this is true for everyone. And what I'm going to recommend here is healthy for everyone to do, but if you're diabetic or pre-diabetic, it's especially healthy. So the first thing that's going to really help anyone with blood sugar issues is to use intermittent fasting. If you don't know what intermittent fasting is, basically what it is eating all your food in a relatively small window of time, which is an 8-hour window. So what you would typically do is 4 hours before you go to bed, you've finished eating. So when you have your last meal and you're going to go to bed 4 or more hours after that. So when you go to bed, your stomach is relatively empty. You're not needing to do much work on digestion during the night. Okay, which is anyway, whatever. So that's the first thing. 4 hours before, then you sleep 8 hours or whatever it is you sleep, but we're working on 8 hours here for the purposes of this illustration. So 4 hours before you go to bed, you don't eat. You go to bed, you sleep 8 hours, you get up, and then you don't eat for another 4 hours. If you sleep for 7 hours, you don't eat for another 5 hours. Okay, so then you can then have all your meals, whatever you normally eat, but I'm going to suggest certain foods in a minute. But even if you don't change your diet at all, and you now eat in the 8-hour window that you now have your breakfast and whatever else you eat, have that food in that time. Now, if you just do that, you eat everything exactly the same as you eat now, you just make sure you eat in that 8-hour window. If you just do that, that's going to be an enormous help to your health. Not just blood sugar, it's going to support your immune, it's going to support detox. It's incredibly healthy to do. Plus, it affects your mental state in giving you control over something a lot of people don't have much control over, to choose when they eat rather than they eat when they feel they need to. Okay, so that's the first and biggest thing that you can do, that everyone can do, diabetic or not, pre-diabetic or not. Very healthy to do. Okay, but if you're diabetic, it's especially important. Intermittent fasting. Now, one of the problems of medications is that if you're on medications, the medications push the blood sugars down. So if you then do something natural that takes the blood sugars down, you can be at risk of the blood sugars going too low. Okay, so if you're taking medications and you're doing natural stuff, you need to be particularly careful to monitor your blood sugars so that they don't go too low. If you're not taking medications, you don't have to worry about that. But if you're taking medications, especially insulin, then you do need to be careful with anything natural that you're helping to take the blood sugars down, that you don't end up, because you've now got two forces at play, the insulin or metformin or whatever it is, and your intermittent fasting or your low carbs, whatever it is you're doing, and you've got these two factors, and so it could potentially go too low. Okay, so intermittent fasting is the first thing that you can do. It's free, and it's going to give you incredible health benefits aside from the sugars. Okay, the second thing that you can do is not mix your carbs with your fats. Okay, so the best thing to do is to choose one or the other, and then that's your diet. You're gonna eat just carbs. So you're gonna eat fruits and veggies, vegan sort of diet only. You're not going to eat fats. I don't recommend that route because there's nutrients and things missing from that. That will work. It'll take your blood sugars down, but over time you're going to start to have deficiencies. So the better option is to go the meat route and eat meat, eggs, cheese, that kind of stuff, what we call the hypercarnivore diet. That will take your blood sugars down to normal if you're strict with that diet. But if you're not so strict, it's still going to take your blood sugars down. It's going to help, especially if you're pre-diabetic. It's going to have a big impact. Now, if you're doing that in conjunction with intermittent fasting, in most cases, especially pre-diabetic, that's enough. You'll fix your problem. Okay, so just doing those two things with your diet, and in some cases, just the intermittent fasting alone is enough for some people. Okay, but if you do the intermittent fasting and just either fat and proteins and fat or carbs, one or the other, then you're gonna increase the results of the intermittent fasting. Okay, so that's the diet side of things. Now, by the way, if you're don't want to go all the way with the meat, then you want to add you want to have some veggies, and you're going to go for the low starch veggies. So you're going to have you're not going to have potatoes. You're going to be having the greens and asparagus and kale and broccoli and cauliflower and peas and all that sort of stuff. Low, low, relatively low sugar. Okay, but not too much of those. But if you need to spice the meat up a little bit, that would be the way I would go. But if the more disciplined you can be, the better the results you're going to be. And everyone's different. So some people are going to get phenomenal results and don't have to go so far. Some people have to be really strict. It just depends on where you are in your journey with your blood sugars and so on. Okay, so let's now touch on supplements. I'm not going to go too much into supplements. But there's various things that you need to know. And diabetes is a bit weird in that it is the one situation where one of the supplements I recommend goes against everything I normally teach because it's a synthetic vitamin, and that's thiamine. So I do recommend that diabetics take synthetic thiamine. And the reason synthetic is it's impossible to do it from a food source because you need to take high dose, much higher than you can get from food. And the reason you need to do that is because diabetics flush 16 times more thiamine. That's type 2 diabetics. It's 25 times more thiamine if you're type 1 than a normal person. So the diabetic is flushing the hell out of this vitamin, and you cannot get enough of it in food. You just can't. So all diabetics are seriously deficient in thiamine, which is B1. And that is a vitamin that protects you from damage from the things that diabetes does. So the diabetic is going to be much more vulnerable to neurological damage and other forms of oxidation and damage because they're deficient in B1, even though they might be eating plenty. It doesn't matter. They're flushing so much of it. So you need high dose B1 if you're diabetic. There's actually many other people that will benefit from high dose B1 other than diabetics, but that's a whole other story. So that's the first supplement that I recommend for diabetics or pre-diabetics even, because it's going to protect you from some of the damage. So I don't think of it as a vitamin, really. I think of it more as a drug when it's synthetic like that. But it's a natural drug. That's kind of how I look at it. So I am type 2. Right, okay, so it's gonna what I'm talking about is gonna help you. So there are certain herbs that are known, and many studies are done to show certain herbs that help balance blood sugars and protect from damage and various other things. One probably with the most research to it is cinnamon. So cinnamon can be very helpful in balancing blood sugars, so that's something worth taking. Now, my preference is an essential oil with cinnamon because you need quite a lot, and with essential oil you can just take one drop and that covers you because it's so super concentrated. So an essential oil is a herb extraction that's super concentrated. So if we give an example, peppermint. So if you've got a pure essential oil, non-adulterated, and most essential oils are adulterated, so you have to be careful. But if you've got a pure unadulterated one drop of peppermint will be the equivalent of like 28 cups of peppermint tea, which you obviously couldn't drink 28 cups. So it's so super concentrated. So if you take cinnamon from a quality essential oil, that will be much more practical, easier than taking the ground up spice. But you can do the ground up spice if you prefer. But you just need a lot more, obviously. So cinnamon is something that I highly recommend. Diabetics tend to be very deficient in quite a range of minerals, especially magnesium, and also certain vitamins because they burn through them for various reasons. So I use a super green product with 44 superfoods in it, which covers all 60 minerals, including magnesium and all the big ones, but all the trace ones as well. So you need to get your minerals if you're diabetic. That's going to help your body function properly. You need them in much higher levels than regular people, just because of the nature of the disease. Not that it's a disease, it's a poisoning, but anyway, you need much higher levels. Yeah, Ceylon cinnamon is the one that you want. That's the best of the cinnamons for diabetes. I don't know who you are because there's no name on there. Show on stream. Can I click that? Oh, I can. Marsha, I think. Yeah. Okay, I can get your name. Oh, that's cool. So there are various other essential oils or herbs, depending on how you take them, that are very helpful. But I'm not going to go all through all the different supplements right here because it'll just take me forever to do that. I want to keep this ideally under 30 minutes, and I think we're approaching that already. So, but oxidation is a major problem for diabetics. That's what's the cause that then creates the inflammation. So there are supplements that you can take to reduce oxidation. Again, I'm not going into all of that. I just want you to know that there are things that you can do. But it all starts with diet. Let me just briefly, coming to the end, to talk about another free thing that you can do. So, which is grounding. Okay, so one of the most natural things that you can do is get your feet on the ground, especially moist ground, ideally, because the connection is better. And what that does, it does something electric. It allows your body to discharge the electrical, the positive charges, and it decreases inflammation significantly. The longer you can do it, the better. So this is one free way, natural way of reducing the inflammation which diabetes causes in massive amounts. Not just diabetes, there's many other problems that people have that cause inflammation. So grounding or earthing, I do it regularly. I just go into the ocean. It's the best way of doing it because you're in water, so the conduction is so much better and it's fun. But not everyone's got that. They're not all living on the beach. So if you're not, then you can just sit in your garden, put your feet on the floor, or sit on the floor, even better, bare feet, of course, and just let your body absorb all those negative ions. And also, if you can, if you have it, the sunshine is great as well. Okay, so that's very, very powerful, very, very healing. So get in the sun if you have it. I know that depending on where you live, you're not all blessed with, like I am, with masses of sun. But if you have got sunshine, get in it and get and ground as well. If you do those two things, again, along with your diet, for many people that will be all that they need to do. But if you do add the supplements, that's going to support and help as well, because being diabetic does put a lot of extra stress on the body. Okay, so I think I've covered a lot of ground just in that half an hour. If there's any questions before I close in the next, which I'm about to do very shortly, if there's any quick questions you want to throw at me, then you need to get them in pretty quick before I close that down. But hopefully the guys has covered enough to give you a starter. So avoid eating fat with carbs. Okay. Ideally not per meal, but on a permanent basis. But even per meal, even if you can't manage that to do a diet of low carb, at least if you're going to eat carbs together at one time, and then eat your protein and fats at another time, some hours separated. Okay, I don't see any questions. Maybe I'm not scrolling down. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I can even see the questions, if there was any. So anyway, if there are questions that I haven't seen, I heard eating pumpkin seeds lowers blood sugar naturally. Well, pumpkin seeds is high in certain minerals. So yeah, if you getting minerals is a big deal. So yeah, pumpkin seeds is something that can help for sure. Thank you, Layla. Okay, guys, I'm hoping that you found that information helpful. If anybody has got diabetes and wants specific support and help with that, I'm happy to do one-on-one consultations and go through that with you in a little bit more detail. Otherwise, just take the advice that I've given in this video, and that alone is going to be able to help a lot of people make huge changes in their blood sugar and health levels. God bless everybody. Have a great day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.